Hello, fishies and sleuths alike. Welcome to Turn the Tide Thursdays. I am Desert Mermaid. If we've met in person, you might know me as Mermaid Cora. And on Thursdays, we just take a moment to relax from the busy week. I read a Nancy Drew book, and you just do whatever you need to. So feel free to get settled in, put your fins up, and listen to our Nancy Drew mystery book, The Invisible Intruder. Before we get there, thank you for being patient with me, and it has been a very fun week, I feel, for me at least. I just saw the other day that they posted on social media about how they've noticed from a resilient standpoint that people that watch anime have been able to be more resilient as they've learned they've had to do hard things, but that they can do that and overcome. I really love seeing that. I have a gratitude towards the arts, especially, movies, nature, TV shows, that people take the time to create a story and we get to watch it through pictures. We have been reading The Invisible Intruder, and we learned. I'm a little scrambled today, so that's why I'm taking a moment. Just breathing in and breathing out, being present in the moment. We all have those days, those moments when things catch up to us, our hearts might beat a little bit fast. But yes. So, The Invisible Intruder, we've been reading. There's 5 ghost hunting trips that are going to occur. Nancy and her friends were able to solve the first one, which was about a haunted canoe. And now they've started learning more about the second one, about going to a seance and lightning appears out of nowhere. They're trying to figure out what's going on because the psychic, or I don't know how she would like to be addressed, but her name is Madame Tarantella, was asking for Nancy's help. Nancy was like, hey, I would like to, check in with my dad. He's a lawyer, and I don't want to do anything that would put both of us in legal jeopardy. Come to find out that somehow a mysterious box gets into Nancy's car. Her dad makes arrangements for this said box to be taken away by a lawyer friend so that Nancy doesn't have to worry about any legal issues, and also if this has something to do, as it's looking like, with the previous ghost hunting trip. He doesn't want Nancy to be in danger. They've already had a moment of Intruder trying to get into Nancy's room at the hotel, and luckily they were able to thwart that person. The chapter 9, finished with a caller letting Nancy Drew know that she had an important message for her from the spirit world. So now we will go to chapter 10. We are getting about halfway through this book, and I'm grateful for this journey. This chapter is called The Trap. "Who is this?" Nancy asked the caller. She knew the voice was not that of Madame Tarantella, unless she was disguising it. The woman did not answer, and for a moment Nancy thought she had hung up. But Nancy had heard no click on the wire. "Who is this?" she asked again. The reply came, "I am a medium. The spirit of your grandfather Drew has sent an important message for you through me." Nancy frowned but did not comment. She was wishing she was not alone, and that there was time before the caller finished speaking to have someone run to another telephone and try to have the call traced. When Nancy made no comment, the woman said, "Did you understand me? I have a message for you from the spirit world, direct from your grandfather Drew." "I heard you," Nancy replied. "Don't you want to hear what it is?" the caller asked impatiently. "I assure you it is of great importance." "Why would my grandfather communicate through you?" Nancy asked. "My dear," said the woman in placating tones, "if you understood how mediums receive messages from people they never have heard of, you would understand this." Again Nancy kept silent, a troubled look on her face. Helen entered the room and came close to her. "Who is it?" she whispered. Before Nancy could answer, the caller said, "The message is, you are to leave the box Madame Tarantella gave you under the stone bridge, which is just 1 mile north of Vernonville on Route 23. Leave it there at exactly 2 o'clock this afternoon, and then drive away. Do not tarry at the spot. Go at once." Nancy said, "What will happen if I don't bring it?" There was a slight show of anger in the medium's voice as she answered, "Your grandfather Drew said if you disobey him, he will punish you." The woman hung up. Nancy explained the call to her friend. Helen was alarmed. "Nancy, she threatened you. I had no idea mediums could be so dangerous. Of course you can't leave the box. Mr. Kittredge has it. What are you going to do?" Nancy said she could always find a substitute box. But Helen argued that when the person who received it discovered the hoax, he or she would retaliate and harm Nancy. "I'll have to take that chance, Helen. But to be sure I'm doing the right thing, I'll phone Mr. Kittredge and tell him what I have in mind." The lawyer was a bit worried at the turn of events and warned Nancy that she must be very careful. "I think your idea of leaving a substitute box is a good one. Be sure to make it the same weight as the box of papers, and take a man with you to the spot. Then, as soon as you have hidden the box under the bridge, please, both of you drive off." Mr. Kittredge added that he would ask the police to have a couple of plainclothesmen stationed nearby to grab whoever came for the box. "I'll let you know what happens," he promised. Helen insisted that Nancy still have her swim, so the two girls went to the pool. Here Nancy whispered to Bess and George and their dates what had occurred and her plan for trying to capture at least one person involved in the mystery. "Directly after lunch, I'll get a box from the housekeeper," she said. "I suppose the easiest way to give it weight is to fill it with newspapers and some stones." She smiled. "Would you boys mind bringing a few of them to my room after lunch?" They grinned and promised to do so. Ned, will you come along with me? Sure thing. I certainly wouldn't think of letting you go alone. I'm glad of that, said Bess. Nancy can think up more dangerous things to do than anyone else I know. And how, George added. During lunch, not only Nancy's group, but all their ghost hunting friends whispered excitedly about what was taking place. As Nancy left the table, each of them wished her luck in the errand. Bess added, Whoever that woman is who called, she was pretty mean to bring your grandfather Drew into it. Nancy smiled. I think so too. He was a darling person, and I don't like to have his name dragged into some underhanded scheme. About 20 minutes to 2, she and Ned were ready to set off. Ned carried the box to the car. Although Bess was worried about the whole adventure, she could hardly keep from giggling when she thought of the contents. Somebody's going to get a whale of a surprise, she said to George. Serves her right, George retorted. Nancy and Ned drove to Vernonville and found Route 23. They watched the speedometer closely. At exactly 1 mile from town, they came to a stone bridge and parked at the side of the road. I guess this is it, Ned said, and they both climbed out of the car. The bridge was old and partly covered with moss. The stream which ran under it was narrow and fairly shallow, and was full of sharp-pointed rocks over which the water gushed and gurgled. Nancy and Ned looked on both embankments to see if anyone were lurking there. They saw no one and did not hear a sound. Finally, they climbed down one embankment and peered under the bridge. No one was there. It was evident that the bridge had been built a long time ago and had been rather crudely put together. There were many ledges on which the box could be set. I see a good spot, Nancy remarked. I'll find out how level it is. And then you set the box up there, Ned. Nancy stepped along the muddy edge of the stream and reached up. Her hand touched something furry. Before she could yank it away, there was a hiss. Claws reached out and scratched her. Oh, Nancy exclaimed as she looked at her hand. It was already starting to bleed. The next instant, the head of a large cat looked over at her. A moment later, 2 tiny heads appeared. Kittens! Ned began to laugh. Old Tabby doesn't want to be disturbed, he remarked. I'm sorry about your hand, he said as Nancy reached down to wash it in the cool water. At that moment, they heard a boy's voice behind them and turned quickly. He was about 10 years old and looked as if he had just come from some farming chores. Hello, Nancy and Ned said together, and Nancy added, Is that your cat up there? Nope, the boy replied. Say, mister, are you Ned Nickerson? Yes, I am. Your friends are up on the road. I saw them looking around. I said maybe you're down here, and I'd take a look. Friends of mine? Ned asked, suspicious as to who the people might be. That's what they said. Their names are Bert and Dave, the boy left. Ned, you better go see what they want, Nancy suggested. They may have brought some information or a message for us. Okay, I'll be right back. He handed the box to Nancy, who began looking around for another ledge. Choosing a wide one, she stood on tiptoe and made sure no animal was resting there. Then she raised the box and set it in place. I'll go up to the road now and see why the other boys came, Nancy told herself. As she walked along the muddy path toward the embankment, the young detective heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, but was too late to defend herself against the sudden attack. A huge hand was clapped over her mouth. Then a husky man began to drag her toward the water. Chapter 11. Spooky Mistake. Chiding herself for having been duped, Nancy struggled fiercely to get away from her captor. She tried again and again to scream, but only muffled sounds came from her throat. "You little vixen," the giant-like man said. "It won't do you no good to struggle. You'll only hurt yourself. I should warn you I'm an expert at judo and karate. If you get too flip, I'll use one or the other on you." Nancy was powerless, but she kept thinking that Ned would return any moment. Where was he? Now the girl's captor pulled her into the water and began to push her down. Horrified, Nancy wondered if he intended to drown her. She began to struggle again. Just then a voice demanded, "Hold it." Nancy's assailant dropped her suddenly, and she hit the rocks. Her captor had already started to run. Nancy stood up quickly. Two men rushed past her after the fleeing figure. They caught him easily, and though he tried some judo and karate tricks, the other two men were more than a match for him. "You've got no right to stop me," their prisoner protested. "This was a personal matter. This girl here is a troublemaker and needed to be punished." "We'll hear her side of the story," one of the men said. The two newcomers introduced themselves as plainclothesmen from the local police department. One of them said, "I'm Sergeant Brothers. This is Detective Perrin." "Who was in touch with you?" Nancy asked to double-check them. "Mr. Kittredge." Nancy was satisfied. "Thank you for coming to my rescue," she said. Before leaving, Nancy pointed out the fake box. The men suggested leaving it. A policeman would come there to watch for anyone who might pick it up. In all the excitement, Nancy had forgotten that Ned had not returned. Was he still talking to Bert and Dave? When she and the detectives and the prisoner reached the road, Nancy was amazed not to find Ned there. Her own car stood where it had been parked, but no other car was in sight, nor any of their friends. Nancy told the detectives about the boy who had come to give Ned the message. "I'm worried that it might have been a hoax and that something has happened to him, too." "That could well be," said Sergeant Brothers. He turned to his prisoner. "Do you know anything about this?" "No." "What's your name?" Detective Perrin inquired. The prisoner remained silent. The detective searched him, but he carried no identification. "Have you anything to say for yourself?" Sergeant Brothers asked the man. "Just one thing. Only I don't work for nobody doing this kind of work. I went to see a medium, and she told me I had to seize Nancy Drew when she was alone under the bridge." "And then?" Detective Perrin urged him. "She said if I didn't do what I was told, I would be punished real bad. Maybe be killed." "Who was this medium?" Nancy asked. "I ain't saying." Sergeant Brothers spoke up. "Why not?" The prisoner said he would say nothing more because he was afraid. "I guess you think that's cuckoo, 'cause I'm such a big, strong guy, but when the spirit world tells you to do something, all the physical strength in the world won't help you none to keep out of it." Nancy looked at the captive in amazement. She had a feeling that the medium was probably the same person who had telephoned her, but since she could not be sure, the man was not part of a gang headed by the Prizers. Nancy said nothing. Changing the subject, she said, "I must hunt for my friend Ned Nickerson." The two plainclothesmen looked at each other. Finally, Sergeant Brothers said, "You mustn't do it alone. Drive your car into town to police headquarters. We'll follow. As soon as this man is arraigned, we'll come back here again with you and see what we can find out." The trip to town took only a few minutes. While Nancy was waiting for the officers to accompany her, she called the motel to find out if by any chance Ned was there. The answer was no. Then she asked if he had phoned a message. "No, Miss Drew." Nancy was becoming more alarmed by the minute. The longer it took to find Ned, the more he might be suffering at the hands of their enemies. Nancy was asked to sign a statement charging one John Doe with assault and battery. Then the two plainclothesmen said they were ready to leave. Nancy drove back to the stone bridge, followed by the two police officers. The three alighted and at once went down the embankment opposite the one where Nancy and Ned had been, since that was the way he had returned to the road. They began hunting for Ned's footprints. At first, they were hard to locate because the soft embankment was full of footmarks. After a search, Nancy was able to spot some ripple-soled shoe prints she was sure were Ned's. At the foot of the embankment, they led away from the stream toward a hollow. "Let's go," Nancy urged. The three proceeded silently, picking their way among rocks, mounds of coarse grass, and brush. At last they reached the hollow, which was filled with a thick growth of trees. It was much easier walking. Excited, Nancy ran ahead of the plainclothesmen. She had spotted a shack among the trees. "Maybe Ned is a prisoner inside," she thought. "Hold on, young lady," Sergeant Brothers called to her. "We don't want anything more to happen to you." Nancy stopped, but urged the men to hurry. When they reached the cabin, the searchers found all the windows boarded up. Whole grass indicated that no one had lived there for some time, or if someone had, he was not using it as a permanent home. The two detectives searched all around the place. They could not trace the footprints any further. "I'm so fearful Ned may be a prisoner in there," Nancy said. "Would it be all right to look inside?" The detectives agreed to unboard one of the windows. Using sharp-pointed stones, they managed to pry the wood loose. Sunlight streamed in through the window. Nancy stood on tiptoe, then gave a gasp. A motionless figure lay on the floor, his back to the onlookers. He wore a white shirt and dark trousers, as Ned had. The head was partially covered with a scarf. Nancy's heart was thumping, but she managed to say, "Oh, please break in. We must find out who that is." The detectives worked on the window until they had it open. As Sergeant Brothers climbed inside, Nancy held her breath. The detective walked over to the figure, knelt down, then burst into a laughter. "It's a dummy," he exclaimed. "A dummy?" Detective Perron repeated. Nancy was so relieved that she found it hard to keep from crying. Blinking back tears of joy, she climbed through the window and looked at the figure. It was indeed a large dummy, the kind used by magicians and ventriloquists. So the footprints had not been Ned's. Where was he then? Nancy felt sure he had been kidnapped, so he could not save her from the man who had tried to drown her. She tried not to think what might have happened to her friend. "I wonder if this belongs to a medium," Nancy remarked as she looked around the room. Hanging on a wall hook was a robe similar to the one Madame Tarantella had worn at the séance. On a table lay a collection of tiny wires with miniature electric bulbs attached. "If all this gear is used for legitimate purposes," Detective Perrin said, "why did the people board up the windows?" Nancy said she thought the place was a hideout and not a home. "I think it warrants investigating," Sergeant Brothers said. "First, we'll find out who owns this cabin." Nancy continued her search and a few seconds later came across a shell. A small card tied to it read, "A Crusader's Shell, so called because it was the emblem of the Crusaders and was worn by St. James, patron saint of Spain, generic name Pecten." Detective Perrin came over to see what Nancy was reading. "That's a beautiful specimen," he said. "My wife has a set of those scallop shells. She uses them to serve salads in and sometimes cream dishes." Nancy inspected the shell closely. At first it seemed to contain nothing of special significance. Then she discovered that two tiny initials had been carved into one of the scallops. They were M.T. Madame Tarantella, Nancy said to herself. Does this shell belong to her? In fact, is all this paraphernalia hers? Sergeant Brothers interrupted the young detective's speculations. We'd better board this place up again and be on our way. Now, what about your friend Ned Nickerson? Nancy's heart suddenly sank again. Their search for Ned had been in vain. Where was he? Chapter 12. Code Identification. There was no conversation as Nancy and the two detectives retraced their steps. Nancy's heart was heavy. She was convinced that Ned had been kidnapped and taken from the area. Noticing Nancy's quiet, worried mood, Sergeant Brothers said, We'll make every effort to find your friend. I suppose it's small comfort to you, but you've put us on the track of something I strongly suspect is not a legitimate operation. Nancy smiled wanly. Please let me know what you learned from the owner of the shack. I will, the officer promised. As they neared the embankment, Nancy noticed a third car on the road. The detective saw it too and got ready for possible trouble. They had just cautioned Nancy to stay behind them while they investigated when four young people stepped from the car, and one of the girls called, Hi, Nancy! Detective Piran looked at the young detective. Do you know them? My best friends, she replied, a note of relief in her voice. Where's Ned? Bert inquired as Nancy and the detectives climbed the embankment. We don't know, Nancy replied. She introduced Bess, George, Bert, and Dave to the police officers. Then the conversation turned to the mystery. The newcomers were briefed on the present situation. Ned has been kidnapped? George cried unbelievingly. We're afraid so, Nancy answered. We don't know where to look for him. Bess remarked, You must have had some frightful moments when you saw that lifeless form and thought he was Ned. I certainly did, Nancy agreed. She looked at the car in which the young people had come from town. Did you borrow this from Helen and Jim? Yes, Dave replied. Do you want us to go on a search for Ned? Sergeant Brothers said he thought this was useless at the moment. The police would send out a missing person alarm. I think it would be best for you young people to return to the motel and wait for some word from us. Bert and George decided they would ride with Nancy and bolster her spirits. They were careful, however, not to be over solicitous, and talked calmly about their speculations. George was positive that the prizers in Madame Tarantella were back of the whole mystery. But their motive eludes me, she said. Bert suggested hopefully that Ned might not have been kidnapped. He could have hidden in the back of the car or truck that dropped off the gorilla who attacked you, Nancy. He seemed like a gorilla, all right, Nancy said with a smile. Bert is right, George added. I'll bet Ned will return with a big surprise. Nancy hoped so, but she was well aware that her friends were trying to cheer her up. When they reached the motel, she insisted upon staying in her room. I want to be right by the telephone if any calls come. The police may phone or someone else. She did not mention Ned's name, but Bess and George knew he was uppermost in her thoughts. Aren't you coming to supper? Bess queried. Nancy shook her head. I'll have a tray sent here. There was no dissuading her, so Bess said she would attend to ordering it. I saw the menu. How about some jellied consomme, southern fried chicken, rice croquettes, beans with mushrooms au gratin? lettuce and cucumber salad, and a chocolate parfait for dessert. Nancy closed her eyes. That much food would make me feel positively ill. I'll just have a plain chicken sandwich, tea, and some fruit. After arranging a signal of 3 knocks on the door for safety, Bess and George showered and changed their clothes, then left the room. Nancy tried to read, but she could not keep her mind on the book. She paced the floor until interrupted by the knocking signal. She opened it. One of the busboys from the dining room was bringing her supper on a tray. He smiled. "You're not feeling well, miss?" he asked. "Oh, I'm all right," Nancy replied. "I'm not very hungry, and besides, I'm waiting for a phone call." The boy placed the tray on a low table and left the room. Nancy sat down and began to munch the chicken sandwich. But after 2 bites, she did not feel like eating any more. The hot tea was so refreshing that she drank 2 cups of it. She eyed a delicious-looking nectarine, but could not bring herself to eat it. "I'll keep the fruit until later," she told herself, and began pacing the floor again. At 8 o'clock, the telephone rang and she sprang to answer it. "Nancy?" It was Ned's voice. "Oh, Ned, are you all right?" she cried. "Never felt better." "Where are you?" "At the 3rd stop on our hunt." "You mean the red barn with the ghost horse?" Nancy asked in amazement. "Right, just outside of Middleburg." "How did you get there?" "I got a ride most of the way, then walked the rest." "I have lots to tell you, Nancy, but most of it will have to wait until I see you." "I was kidnapped by 2 masked men, but I escaped. I can't tell you any more now. What I want you and all the ghost hunters to do is get up here as quickly as possible. I've made reservations at Red Barn Guest House for everyone." Nancy said she would speak to the others immediately and call back. He gave her the number. She hurried to the dining room. The ghost hunters were just leaving. Quickly she explained to them about the call, but added, "There's a possibility that Ned is being held by kidnappers who made him telephone. It might be a ruse to get us away from here and over to the Red Barn." "But how can you find out?" Bess asked. Nancy smiled. "Some time ago, Ned and I decided on a code identification. When I call him back, I'll use it." Dave was intrigued. "May we listen?" he asked. "Come along," Nancy said. For privacy, they all went to her room and she made the call. The woman who answered the phone said she would get Mr. Nickerson at once. When Ned came on the phone, Nancy asked him, "What is your right name?" He laughed heartily. "I get you. It's Edward Emerson." "Hold the line a minute, Ned," Nancy requested. She turned to the other ghost hunters and said, "That answer means Ned is not a prisoner. If he had been, he would have said, 'I keep my middle name a secret.'" Nancy spoke to Ned again. "We'll be at the Red Barn Guest House early tomorrow morning." As soon as Ned had hung up, Nancy telephoned Sergeant Brothers and told him Ned had been kidnapped but escaped. Then she asked the officer if he had any information about the cabin with the dummy in it. He told her no one had come there in the meantime, and the owner had said he had never given permission for anyone to use the place. "We removed all of the paraphernalia and brought it here to headquarters," Sergeant Brothers said. "By the way, that male dummy is very interesting. Actually, he's a kind of robot with all sorts of gadgets to make him perform. He can walk, run, and even attack a person with some karate-like motions." Nancy told the detective her suspicions about Madame Tarantella and the initials on the shell. "She may be part of the gang carrying on some shady business. We're moving tomorrow to the Red Barn Guest House outside Middleburg." The officer thanked her, then said that the police would get in touch with her if there were any further developments. When Nancy told the other ghost hunters about the robot, George said, Um, it could attack someone or steal without leaving a single foot fingerprint. One thing is sure, Nancy went on. The person who built it is a clever engineer. That, of course, points to Wilbur Preiser. When the ghost hunters reached the Red Barn guest house the following morning, Ned took them into the living room. They found that he was the only person staying there. George remarked upon this. People are afraid to come here, Ned told her. The owner, Mrs. Hodge, she's in the attic now, is very discouraged and said she may have to sell the place for far less than it is worth. Does that sound familiar? In a chorus, the ghost hunters answered, 70 Lake and Pine Grove Camp. I suspect something similar may be occurring here, Ned remarked. We'll have to find out. Nancy asked, have there been any other ghost-like happenings here besides the phantom horse with the rider running after it? Ned nodded. Mrs. Hodge says all sorts of queer things have been going on here lately, some of them inside the house. The old ghost story had long since been forgotten. Then, a few weeks ago, a guest actually saw the apparition. She told others, and little by little, everyone moved out. After that, newcomers stayed only a short time because one of them always saw the horse and the rider. Of course, the story spread, and now no one writes for reservations or stops here. What a shame, Bess exclaimed. Bert said in a quiet voice, You don't think Mrs. Hodge is having hallucinations, do you? No, I don't, Ned replied. I was introduced to one of the happenings last night. Oh, what was it? Bess asked excitedly. Ned said he had been awakened by terrible screaming out on the road. It sounded as if someone were beating another with a chain. Horrible, Bess shuddered. It alarmed me naturally, Ned went on. I ran to the window and looked out. There wasn't a person in sight. I half expected to see an apparition, maybe even the horse and rider, but nothing appeared. The screaming had stopped? Nancy asked. Yes. This morning I asked Mrs. Hodge about it. She had heard the sounds too and looked out, but saw nothing suspicious. She's convinced that someone is trying to ruin her business on purpose. For a few minutes they discussed the strange affair. Then Nancy said, Ned, tell us what happened to you after you left me under the bridge. A couple of thugs jumped me from some bushes. I was no match for them, so I pretended to black out. They dumped me in the back of their car. An hour later, on a side road, they had a flat tire and got out. I suddenly came to life and ran off in the woods. But why did they kidnap me? Nancy told him about her experience at the bridge and added, They wanted you out of the way. The conversation was suddenly interrupted by a loud crash upstairs. Chapter 13. The Vanishing Horse. The ghost hunters dashed up the stairs with Ned in the lead. They hurried along the second floor hall to a door leading to the attic. A woman stood at the foot of the stairway. Mrs. Hodge, Ned exclaimed, what fell? The woman was ash white, in her plain, pale gray dress and white hair. She almost looked like a ghost herself. She answered in a trembling voice, A trunk. It's been standing on top of another one for years. All of a sudden, while I was up there, it began to teeter, then crashed to the floor. It was evident to Nancy that Mrs. Hodge was unnerved. Without waiting for an introduction, she went up to the woman and put an arm about her waist. Please come and lie down, she said gently. We'll investigate and see if we can find out why the trunk toppled over. She supported Mrs. Hodge, who led the way to her own bedroom. The others followed, all expressing sympathy over her fright. Ned then introduced Nancy and the other ghost hunters. Mrs. Hodge acknowledged their friendly greetings and remarked that this was no way for the owner of a guest house to welcome anyone. "Please don't worry about it," Nancy said. "We know you have had a great deal of trouble and we'd like to help you. Will it be all right if we search the attic?" "Please do," Mrs. Hodge said. Since the attic was small, it was decided that only Nancy's group would go. Rita wanted to determine for herself if there were any supernatural angles to the incident, and she went with them. They climbed the stairs and looked around. The crudeness of the unfinished attic and the small windows indicated that the house was very old. Antique pieces of furniture and boxes stood here and there. An old blanket was flung across a rafter. To one side lay the toppled trunk. Its lid had opened, scattering flimsy old-fashioned dresses on the floor. Behind it stood the other trunk. Nancy hoped to find a reason for the accident. While the others in the group looked around the big room, she and Ned pushed the second lightweight trunk away from its position. They found that its contents were antique dolls and toys. "Ned, look!" Nancy exclaimed, pointing to the floor. Where the trunk had stood was a trap door with an iron handle. Ned pulled the door up easily. The underside was covered with wallpaper which matched that of the bedroom closet below. The door to the room was open. "Someone was under this trap door and pushed it up," Nancy remarked. "I guess he stood on the dressing table stool that's in the closet." "Let's go downstairs and see if anyone's hiding," said Ned. With a quick explanation to the others, they scurried down the stairs and rushed to the bedroom with the trap door. No one was there. The couple made a quick search of the other rooms on the second floor, then hurried to the first floor. They had no luck there either. "I guess the intruder made his getaway while we were all talking to Mrs. Hodge in her bedroom," Ed surmised. They went upstairs and told Mrs. Hodge what they had discovered. Nancy asked, "Did you know there was a trap door in that closet?" "No, I didn't. Oh dear. This is just one more sign that I am being harassed by the real and the unreal." "Have you any suggestions as to where the mischief maker might be hiding?" Nancy asked. "Do you have a basement?" "Yes, but I keep it locked and carry the key with me. He couldn't be down there, but it's possible he might be hiding out in the barn." "We'll look there," Nancy said. She went back to the attic and told her friends what she and Ned had found and their plan to search the barn. "Please come and help us." I lost my spot for a moment. My apologies. Okay. "Please come and help us," she said, smiling at Rita. She added, "I'm afraid there was nothing supernatural about the fallen trunk. An intruder probably had been waiting for another chance to scare Mrs. Hodge. Perhaps he stayed in that room as a guest and found out about the trap door." The rest of the ghost hunters started for the barn, but Nancy stayed behind to speak to Mrs. Hodge. "Can you recall the names of all the people who rented the room with the trap door during the past year or so?" "Not offhand, but I'll show you my guest book." She and Nancy went to the first floor, and Mrs. Hodge brought out the old-fashioned register. Together, she and Nancy quickly scanned the list of guests. Suddenly, Nancy stopped at a date 1 year previously. She pointed to it excitedly. "Here are two names familiar to me," she said. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilbur Prizer." Nancy asked what the man and woman looked like. Mrs. Hodges' description exactly fitted the couples Nancy were trying to find. "They're the ones!" Nancy exclaimed. "Can you tell me anything else about them?" "Well, not much. They seemed very nice and kept to themselves a lot. The two were great hikers. They spent much of their time outdoors walking through the fields and woods. Once Mrs. Prizer said to me, "I wish I had a place like this. Did you ever think of selling it?" Of course, I told her no. At that time, my business was very good. At that time, yes, my business was very good. Elated with her clue, Nancy hurried off to join her friends and tell them what she had learned. Ned said, "When I was kidnapped, I picked up a note on the car floor. It said, 'Force Sale, Red Barn.' I'm sure it's this place." "Obviously, you're right," Nancy exclaimed. "Prizer's trying to break down Mrs. Hodges' resistance before offering her a low price for the farm." The others agreed. They had found no one hiding in the barn or any of the outbuildings and gave up the search. During the afternoon, the group discussed ways to track down the mysterious horse and rider that appeared at the farm. "It will be bright moonlight tonight," Nancy spoke up. "Why don't we take turns standing watch in the barn and see if the phantom animal appears?" The ghost hunters agreed and drew lots for time periods. Nancy's group was to be on duty from 10 to 2. They all took naps directly after supper and then appeared in the barn promptly at 10. "We didn't see a thing," Helen reported as her foursome finished their watch. "Everything's quiet," she laughed. "I like to bet that if there's going to be any excitement, it will come during the time Nancy Drew is here." The young detective and her friends settled down to watch. There were the usual sounds of night birds and insects, but nothing else. The young people found it hard to stay awake and kept nudging one another when a head fell forward in sleep. It was a beautiful night. Stars gleamed brightly and the moon shone brilliantly. Every tree, bush, and building was sharply silhouetted. If anyone should appear, he surely would be seen clearly. Off in the distance, a clock struck the midnight hour. 1 minute later, Bess grabbed Nancy's arm. "There it is," she whispered. Emerging from the woods was a white, ghost-like horse. It began to gallop across the field. As everyone watched tensely, its rider came from among the trees. He was dressed in white riding attire and ran pell-mell after the horse. At first the animal came directly toward the barn, and the onlookers wondered if he intended to dash inside. They shrank back from the doorway, but a few seconds later the horse veered around and headed towards the woods. The trailing rider turned also and sped after it. "We must try to catch him," Nancy exclaimed. She and the others rushed from the barn and raced across the field. Would they find the animal and the man among the trees, or had they gone on further? By the time the ghost hunters reached the spot where the man and his horse had entered the woods, there was no sign of either. "They weren't real. They were phantoms," Bess said shakily. Ned dropped to his knees and put his ear to the ground. "Funny," he said. "I can't hear the sound of hoofbeats." "Of course not," said Bess. "The horse and rider were spooks." She recommended that they all go back to the barn until 2 o'clock and then get some sleep. Since it seemed impractical to try to follow the horse and rider through the dark woods, the searchers did as Bess suggested. No one else appeared during the rest of the period. The episode was reported to the next set of watchers. In the morning, they reported that nothing had happened during the rest of the night. But I wish it had, Dawn said in disappointment. At Sunday breakfast, Nancy proposed that the ghost hunters make a search in the woods for clues to the strange horse and rider. All agreed that it was a good idea and set off together. As they walked through the field leading to the woods, Rita said in a hushed tone, "There are no hoofprints. That means he was a ghost horse." "I agree," said Bess. "Oh dear, I don't like this." Nancy found a series of footprints, however, in exactly the direction the phantom rider had taken from the woods and back again. "I'll bet," said Rita, "that these footprints belonged to somebody else. The ghost horse had a phantom rider." Following the man's footprints, the searchers came to a place in the woods where several bushes were broken down. A moment later, George cried out, "I see hoofprints!" She started to run and soon outdistanced the others. Suddenly, Bess screamed, then cried in terror. George fell out of sight! Seemingly, the earth had swallowed her cousin. Okay. And the next chapter is chapter 14. I'm just going to take a quick break and then we will get back to it. Thank you so much for bearing with me while I took just a really short break. We have so much happening in the book. I just needed to take a breather. But that is more than fun because this is exciting. We're already on to the third part of the ghost hunt out of 5, and they keep stacking up together like seashells. And speaking of seashells, chapter 14 is called The Shell Clue. Horrified, Nancy and her friends rushed ahead to find out what had happened to George. Had the ghost rider waylaid her? George! George! Where are you? Bess cried frantically. It did not take them long to find George. She had fallen into a shallow pit covered with brush. Disentangling herself from the twigs and branches, she said sheepishly, "I sure fell into a trap. Old George doesn't know whether she's supposed to be a bear or a rabbit." Others laughed, and Bess heaved a great sigh of relief. Bert reached down a hand to help George climb out. "I wonder why someone dug a pit here," Dave remarked. "Probably to keep anybody from following the horse," George declared. "Let's find the hoof prints and pursue them." The group hastened on through the woods. It was easy to follow the marks, but unfortunately they ended at the main road, which was macadam, and failed to show the prints. "I guess we'll have to give up," Ned remarked. Too bad. Disappointed, the ghost hunters turned around and retraced their steps through the woods. Dave said he was still puzzled about the horse. We know that it was real, and so was the rider. But why didn't the animal leave hoof prints in the field? Nancy said she had a theory. I don't believe that white horse was real. It was probably a tremendous balloon stretched over a mechanical horse, which the rider guided by remote control. You mean like the phantom canoe? George queried. Yes, and of course this makes me think that the rider was Wilbur Kaiser. Bert said he could not understand why the man went to such elaborate and presumably expensive means to pull a ghost trick. Is he some kind of nut? Or a heartless crook? Said Nancy. When they reached the pit, which George had fallen into, Nancy stopped. I have a hunch we should investigate under the brush in there. The boys jumped in and removed the twigs and branches. Then Nancy slid down and began to search. There were many leaves to be cleared away, but finally her efforts were rewarded. She picked up a small shell. I wonder if somebody threw this in here, she said, or if the digger dropped it from his pocket. George remarked, Another shell. Is anything carved on it? As soon as Nancy climbed topside where the light was better, she began to examine the shell. Here's a mark, she said, the same as I've seen before. M.T. That woman must be an avid collector, Dave remarked. This shell is pretty. It was deep orange and had an interesting curled over section to form the abode of the snail which had lived inside. When they reached the guest house, Mrs. Hodge asked the ghost hunters if they would like to attend church with her. At once, Nancy and Ned said they would be glad to accompany her. George said, I'd like to go too. How much time do we have to get ready? I fell in a hole and I'll have to take a bath. Oh, you have a half hour, Mrs. Hodge said. I'll make it, George said, and dashed up the steps 2 at a time. Everyone wanted to go and went to their rooms to put on more appropriate clothes than the sport outfits they were wearing. Nancy was ready first and came back downstairs to show Mrs. Hodge the shell. Do you know what it is? I love the color of it. No, I don't, the woman replied, but there's a book on shells in the living room bookcase. Look on the shelf where the paperbacks are. Nancy located the book easily and turned the pages until she found a picture of a shell like the one in her hand. There is a large family of shells called Cypraea, the book stated. Their common name is cowries. These shells are prized by the natives in the Fiji Islands of the Pacific. At one time, the chief wore a cowrie as a badge of his office, and nobody else was allowed to. She read on. From what she learned, Nancy told herself this must be Cypraea orientum, or golden cowrie. The article said the shells were so rare that the government had put a ban on the sale of them outside the islands. Then there's no chance of my getting one, Nancy thought. At that moment, Ned appeared and she told him what the book said about the rare shell. I'm sure that whoever lost this one will return to the pit and try to retrieve it. Let's go back there after dinner and do a little spying, she suggested. I'm game, he said. I only hope the person we want to see hasn't come and gone before we get there. Nancy sighed. I guess we'll have to take that chance. Although she doubted that the prizers would show up at church, nevertheless, at the beginning of the service, Nancy looked carefully at each person in the congregation. No one present resembled the prizers. Nancy gave full attention to the sermon on the text, Thou shalt not steal. The listeners were reminded that there are many types of stealing besides taking other people's property. They included stealing another's time, good reputation, and a person's happiness. Nancy could not help but think of the prizers. When the service was over, she suggested a drive around the small town of Middleburg. Maybe we can spot something to help us solve the mystery. But no leads turned up. This is certainly a nice, peaceful country town, Bess remarked. I hope those awful prizers don't come here and upset things. 2 hours later, when the ghost hunters had finished dinner, Nancy's group walked back to the pit in the woods. They could see no evidence that anyone had been there. Maybe we're not too late to nab a person coming to look for the shell, Bert remarked. The watchers rearranged the brush to look as it had before George tumbled in. Then each chose a tree behind which to hide. The wait seemed interminable. The boys grew restless, and Nancy could see them doing some stretching and jumping exercises. Presently there came a loud "Ouch!" from Bess, and she called to the others, I got stung. George hushed her cousin. Put some mud on it, and for goodness sake keep quiet, she said. You'll ruin our chance of capturing anyone coming here. Bess subsided. She was close to a little stream and scooped up a small quantity of mud to plaster the sting on her arm. Time seemed to pass slowly. Again and again, the young people glanced at their wrist watches. Dave was about to call it quits when they heard a sound not far away. Footsteps. The 6 spies remained hidden but kept their eyes on the path. A boy about 16 years old was coming in their direction. He was nice looking and well dressed. Surely he isn't the person we're searching for, Nancy told herself. The boy stopped when he reached the brush-covered hole. He stood looking at it for several seconds, then leaned down and began throwing the twigs and branches aside. Someone must have sent him here to get the shell, Nancy thought. The hidden watchers had arranged beforehand that if anyone came to the hole, at a signal from Nancy, they would surround him. Now she raised her arm and brought it down again. Moving stealthily, the 6 young people stepped from hiding and took positions around the boy. They had been so quiet that he was completely unaware of their presence. He jumped in fright when Ned said to him, What are you looking for? Chapter 15. Outwitted. The startled boy cried out, I who? He stammered. Seeing that he was surrounded, a look of fear came into his eyes, but in a moment he regained his composure. I'm just searching for rabbits, the boy answered Ned. There's nothing wrong with that. George spoke up. Did you expect to find them down in the hole? Sure, why not? Nancy walked up to the boy and looked him straight in the eye. Are you telling the truth? She asked. I have an idea you're looking for something else. Suppose I am? He asked. Nancy decided to take the plunge. By any chance, are you searching for a shell? She asked. The boy jumped in astonishment. His bravado vanished. He said in a trembling voice, How did you know? I found it myself, she said. Who owns the shell? I don't know, the boy said, and that's the truth. My name's Steve Rover, and I live in Middleburg. A tall, thin guy came up to me and asked if I would like to earn a little money. When Steve paused, Nancy prompted him. He offered to pay you to find the shell? The boy nodded. The man didn't tell me who he was, just said he'd fallen into the hole and hurt his ankle. He couldn't walk far. That's why I came. How did you get out here? Nancy queried. Steve said the man had driven him to the edge of the woods, and he had hiked in from there. He's waiting for me. I don't know what he'll say when I don't bring the shell. Ned spoke up. We'll go with you, but stay out of sight. If this fellow is the man we think he is, it would be best if you appear to be alone. But after that, don't have anything to do with him. Ned, Bert, and Dave would precede the others and hide, ready to pounce on the man as soon as Steve reached the car. The three girls, for reasons of safety, were to bring up the rear. Also, Nancy thought, if we're all watching him, Steve won't have any chance to double-cross us by running away. Ned and his companions halted at the edge of the highway, but kept themselves well screened by the trees. A car stood there, but no one was in it. Their eyes roamed the woods on both sides of the road, but they saw no one. I wonder where the man is, Ned asked himself. In a few minutes, Steve came sauntering along. Ned surmised that the boy was frightened, but kept going. Steve walked out to the car, opened the front door, and climbed in. He had barely closed the door and sat down when he moved over into the driver's seat. "That's funny," Nancy whispered as she came up to where Ned was hiding. "Maybe it's some kind of a trick," Ned said. The next moment, Steve started the motor. At once, he shifted into gear and started down the road. "Oh no," cried Bess as she and George joined the group. "He put it over on us." And at that very second, the watcher saw a figure rise up from the floor of the rear seat. The man was tall, slender, and had bushy hair. "Prizer!" Bert shouted in disgust. "He sure outwitted us." "Yes," Nancy said, "but at least he didn't retrieve the shell. We'll give that bit of evidence to the police." As the car roared off, the young people made notes of its make, model, and license number. It should be easy for the police to pick him up. "Yes," Bert agreed, "but by the time we can telephone them, Prizer could be far away and have different license plates on the car." "What will we do?" George asked. Nancy suggested that they hike down the road. "At the first house we come to, we'll ask to use the phone." The 6 young people strode along at a fast pace, but continued to talk about the clever way Prizer had eluded them. "When Steve got in the car," said Nancy, "I suppose Prizer ordered him to drive away. He probably was told he would be harmed if he didn't go whizzing off." "I wonder if Steve will tell him about us," Bess said. "I hope not," George retorted. "If Prizer finds out we have the shell, he may do something drastic to get it back." It was a long, hot walk to the next house. The family who lived there was seated on the lawn. They greeted the group affably and said their name was Sutton. "You look hot," Mrs. Sutton spoke up. "Would you like some cool drinks?" "Thank you. That would be very welcome," Nancy replied. "But first I'd like to use your telephone to call the police. We saw a rather peculiar incident on the road about a mile from here, and we'd like to report it." Mrs. Sutton led Nancy into the house and showed Nancy where the telephone was. In the meantime, the woman went to the kitchen and poured 6 tall glasses of fruit juice and filled the plate with homemade cookies. When she and Nancy returned to the lawn, the young people sat down on the grass and began to sip the cool drink. Nancy asked the family if they knew Steve Rover in Middleburg. One of the daughters answered, "I know Steve. He was in high school with me, but he dropped out. He's okay, but he hates school." Mr. Sutton spoke up. "Yes, Barbie, and he hates work evidently from what I hear in town." "We have our fingers crossed that he isn't in any trouble," Nancy went on. Briefly, she told about Steve and the man in the car. Barbie's eyes widened. "You mean that man might harm Steve?" "Oh, I hope not." "We hope not too," said Nancy, "but I'm worried." The refreshments and few minutes of relaxation restored the hiker's vigor. Ned asked if by any chance there might be a shortcut back to the Red Barn guest house. "You're from that place?" Mrs. Sutton asked. "I hear that ghost horse has started appearing again, and nobody will stay there anymore." "Unfortunately, that's true," Nancy told her. She smiled. We hope to solve the mystery because we don't think it's really a phantom horse and rider. Probably someone is trying to frighten Mrs. Hodge. But why? That's what we're trying to find out, said Nancy. The young sleuth did not feel that she should say anything about her suspicions, that Prizer was trying to get the property at a low price. Mr. Sutton said, I wish you luck. Well, about a shortcut. Half a mile farther from here you'll see a dirt road on your right. Take that and it will bring you out a short distance from the guest house. You'll be able to see it from the road. The young people thanked the Suttons for their hospitality and started off. After they had hiked along the dirt road for some distance, Dave began to laugh. What's that old saying about the longest way round is the shortest way home, or is it the shortest way round is the longest way home? Anyway, this is the longest shortcut I've ever taken. The six trudged on and finally came to the end of the dirt road. As Mr. Sutton had said, they could see the red barn guest house in the distance and turned toward it. They found Mrs. Hodge very upset. It was evident she had been crying. Bess went up to her and put an arm around the woman's waist. Something's happened. What is it? Bess asked. Tearfully, Mrs. Hodge replied, I drove into town to call on a friend right after dinner. When I returned, I found the house had been ransacked. Chapter 16. Aim, Fire. How dreadful, Bess exclaimed. Did the burglar take much? I don't know, Mrs. Hodge replied. I got here only a few minutes ago. I'm terribly sorry, Nancy spoke up. Weren't any of our friends at home? No, everyone was out. Oh dear, what shall I do now? Nancy told her that the police should be notified immediately. Would you like me to make the call? After reporting the burglary, Nancy and her friends went upstairs to see if the thief had tampered with their luggage. Clothes and cosmetics were strewn about the floor. A quick check indicated that nothing had been taken. He must have been looking for something special, George remarked. Nancy, what do you think it was? Nancy shrugged. Possibly the shell. Prizer may have forced Steve to tell him that we'd found it. I had it well hidden under the lining of my suitcase. Bess looked skeptical. But if he thought we had it, why did he ransack Mrs. Hodge's possessions? I wish I knew the answer, said Nancy. Let's go downstairs and see if we can help Mrs. Hodge. She's had so much trouble it doesn't seem fair for any more to be heaped on her. They found the woman in the living room. She looked up, a puzzled expression on her face. Nothing much was taken, she said. Just a little money and jewelry. I don't understand it. The boys had come into the room, and Ned suggested that the burglar was looking for some particular thing of value to him. But what could it be? Mrs. Hodge asked. Do you own anything rare and worth a lot of money? Bert queried. Mrs. Hodge shook her head. After my husband's death, I sold everything of value. Nancy gazed thoughtfully around the room. She noticed an old file box on the floor in a corner. It had been opened, and the papers rifled there. Was there anything valuable in there? Nancy asked. Suddenly, Mrs. Hodge clutched her throat. Yes, the deed to this property. She dropped to her knees and began looking through the papers hurriedly. Nancy knelt beside her to help. Finally, Mrs. Hodge sat down on the floor, looking pathetically forlorn. It's gone. The deed to this farm has been stolen. So that's what the burglar was looking for, Bess spoke up. Oh, Mrs. Hodge, I'm dreadfully sorry. What will you do? During this conversation, Nancy's thoughts had turned to Wilbur Prizer. She felt sure he had planned the theft. The man, posing as a realtor, intended to use the deed in some way to get the red barn. A few minutes later, two police officers arrived. After hearing the story, one remarked, "Stealing a deed is a major offense." "Mrs. Hodge, have you any idea who might have done it?" "No, I haven't, but Nancy Drew here has." When the young detective gave the name of the suspect, the officer who had introduced himself as Lieutenant Sanford said, "Wilbur Preiser is the same person you telephoned us about a few hours ago." "That's right," Nancy replied. "We think he is personally responsible for the ghostly happenings in certain places, so he can force the owner to sell. He apparently also steals shell collections, and Madame Tarantella is involved. I found a cowrie with her initials on it." Nancy said she would turn the shell over to him and went to get it. When she returned, Sanford looked at her in amazement. "You're an amateur detective, aren't you? Haven't I read about you in the newspapers?" Nancy blushed and admitted that some of the mysteries she had solved had been publicized. Quickly changing the subject, she asked, "Is there any news about Steve Rover and the car he went away in?" "Yes," Sanford replied. "The car was found abandoned. It had been stolen. Neither the man you saw nor Steve Rover has been seen." Bess caught her breath. "You mean Steve hasn't returned home?" The officer said no, and his mother was frantic. "No doubt the man who hired him to look for the shell learned about his meeting you in the woods. At this point, that fellow Preiser probably decided it would be too dangerous to let Steve go." "I feel so sorry for his mother," said Bess. "Oh, I hope that horrible Wilbur Preiser doesn't hurt him." The policeman assured the group that every effort was being made to find the boy. The officers agreed that Preiser or one of his pals had come to the Hodge home with a dual purpose: to find the shell, which had some special meaning to him, and to steal the deed to the property. The officers spent some time in the farmhouse searching for clues. Nancy watched them, fascinated, and picked up a couple of points which she felt might be useful in her own future investigations. The two officers made several notes in their report books, but were not able to get any fingerprints or footprints. Sanford remarked, "Evidently, the burglar walked around in stocking feet and had gloves on." He opened a kit and took out a strong magnifying glass to examine the floor in Mrs. Hodge's bedroom. Presently he picked up a hair, then a speck of mud. "The burglar has dark, bushy hair," he announced, "and he may be staying near a stream where ferns are growing." The officer looked at Nancy. "I'd say he has a bad temper and stomps his foot hard when he's mad or frustrated. The fellow crushed fern leaves into the mud on his shoes." The policeman got ready to leave. "I'll let you know what else we find out," Sanford promised. Shortly afterward, the other ghost hunters came in and were greatly upset when they heard of Mrs. Hodge's loss. After checking their own belongings, they reported that nothing had been taken. There had been so much excitement that supper had been forgotten. The girls offered to prepare the meal. At first, Mrs. Hodge protested. She could not allow paying guests to do this, but after a little persuasion, she consented. They had just finished eating when the telephone rang. Ned answered it, but called Nancy, saying that her father was on the wire. "How's everything going?" Mr. Drew asked. "Never a dull moment," Nancy replied, and brought him up to date on events connected with the mystery. Her father said, "You're certainly having an exciting trip. I just had a telephone call from an acquaintance of mine, Mr. Warfield. He lives at the allegedly haunted mountain inn where you ghost hunters are supposed to go next." It's a strange coincidence, Mr. Drew went on. Mr. Warfield, of course, didn't know you were coming there. He called me to suggest that you make a trip to the place and solve the mystery. Nancy laughed. I'm flattered, she said. When do you plan to go there? Her father asked. Nancy said the group had not discussed it yet, but she could see no reason for not going the next day. I doubt that the phantom horse will appear again, she said. The deed to the farm is a better weapon for Mr. Prizer to frighten Mrs. Hodge into selling. Tell her not to accept any offers, Mr. Drew advised. Furthermore, I think that after you leave, Mrs. Hodge should hire a private detective to stay there with her. I'll tell her, Nancy replied. She promised to call her father as soon as they arrived at Crag Mountain Inn. After she had hung up, Nancy told Mrs. Hodge her father's suggestion about hiring a detective. Then she joined the ghost hunters on the porch to talk over the idea of leaving. All agreed that since the police were working on the case of the Red Barn guest house, there was no reason for them to stay any longer. Ned said, I suggest we pull out of here at 10 o'clock and have lunch on the way. I could go for a lobster dinner, and there's a restaurant that specializes in it about 2 hours from here. I suppose we're in no great hurry to arrive at Crag Mountain. Your idea about a lobster sounds cool, Bert spoke up. I vote we stop there. In the morning they packed quickly and put the luggage in their cars. Mrs. Hodge said she could not thank Nancy and the others enough for all they had done. I feel calmer now. In fact, I called my attorney and told him about the stolen deed. He agreed to take care of the matter. That's good, said Nancy. All the ghost hunters shook hands with Mrs. Hodge and wished her luck. She, in turn, thanked them profusely for their help. After a delicious lobster dinner en route, they arrived at Crag Mountain. The inn was built at the summit and on almost solid rock. Below it was dense woods. Mr. Warfield, Mr. Drew's friend, was waiting to greet Nancy and her friends. He was a tall, gray-haired man with a warm smile. As soon as you've been assigned rooms, I'll brief you on this interesting old place and its history. Half an hour later, the ghost hunters assembled in the lobby. Mr. Warfield was waiting for them. This inn, he said, was once a fortress and housed many prisoners. Legend has it that most of them died from maltreatment. Their ghosts wail and cry out in the dungeons, and then escape to the outdoors where they flit around and scare people. Bess hunched her shoulders and frowned. It was evident this story was making her nervous. Nancy asked, How recently has anyone seen a ghost, Mr. Warfield? Night before last, he answered. One of the guests, who was seated outside rather late in the evening, suddenly rushed into the lobby. He declared he had seen a ragged phantom soldier come through the wall of the basement and stagger around, then disappear among the trees. Nancy was suspicious. She asked, Did only one guest see him? Yes, Mr. Warfield replied. Nancy did not express her thoughts aloud, but she was convinced it was another hoax. Is the guest still here? Mr. Warfield shook his head. The man said he wouldn't stay another day and left early in the morning. Nancy had two theories about the story of the apparition. Either a specter had been arranged for the benefit of the guest so he could spread the story and keep people away from the inn, or the man had been a member of Prizer's gang and had come to plant the untrue story. Presently, Mr. Warfield said, Presently, Mr. Warfield said that the next morning he would take the visitors to the lower part of the former fortress and show them the various sections. The storerooms and kitchen are still used today, he explained, but the dungeons are locked up. I'm glad of that, Bab said. George chuckled. Are the keys left in the doors to make it easy for the ghosts to get out? Mr. Warfield laughed. I don't know the reason, but you're right about the keys being left in the locks on the outside of the doors. They're huge, old-fashioned turnkeys. Perhaps the owner of this inn thinks they're an interesting tourist attraction. You'll see it all in the morning. The ghost hunters were intrigued by the promise of such a venture. Nancy determined to make a thorough search of the place. Tonight I'll sit out on the terrace and watch for ghosts, she said to herself. The supper hour did not end until 9 o'clock, and everyone declared he had overeaten. Let's walk up and down the porch 50 times, Ned proposed. The ghost hunters giggled as they found themselves passing and repassing one another when they came to each end. Finally, all of them went out to the stone parapet in front of the inn. Some of the group sat in chairs, others on the ground, and while still others, including Nancy, seated themselves on the wall near the edge. There was a lively exchange of banter, followed by speculations about the mystery. About an hour later, they were startled to hear a whistling sound overhead. Looking up, the ghost hunters were amazed to see a bursting display of fireworks. Almost immediately, this was followed by a barrage of flaming rockets, which came directly toward the watchers. Before Nancy could move, one of the rockets hit her arm, and she cried out in pain. I will keep us on this cliffhanger. Um, I was debating on trying to finish this book, but I think we've been here long enough. I hope that your day has been well, that listening has been able to just let your mind wander and relax from the busy week, from the busy day. You're doing great things, and may you continue to do so. I plan on next week finishing up the book, and I might decide to start a new one. Until the next tide, thank you for swimming on by, and stay sleuthy.